Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. The British government's Brexit strategy can be summed up in new Prime Minister Boris Johnson's three-word phrase, do or die. The UK is leaving on October the 31st, he says, deal or no deal. And right now, a deal between London and Brussels appears unlikely. So what about the alternative? Well, my guest is Iain Duncan Smith, former Conservative Party leader and ardent Brexiteer. Can Prime Minister Johnson deliver a no-deal exit? And what would it mean for Britain's politics and economy? Iain Duncan Smith, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
If I may, let me begin by quoting to you the words of an EU official in Brussels, uttered just a couple of days ago. A no-deal exit now appears to be the UK government's central scenario. Would you agree with that?
Well, in the sense that the government's made it pretty clear that they think that the existing withdrawal agreement is dead, unless there is major surgery to it, and the government has set out at a starting point, which is the end of the backstop, then they're not prepared to discuss it. Now, I suspect that they're open to other discussions, but that is certainly not the discussion. So what he's saying is essentially, yes, that's the position that we're in. We prepare for no deal and just try and figure out what's going to happen with the European Union. It's up to them, really.
You must be delighted.
Well, I've always wanted an arrangement with the European Union, but I've always said, look, the only way you can negotiate, the only way you can do this is to ultimately deliver on the referendum, which was to leave. And so to that extent, you have to decide that you're leaving, come what may.
So right now, then, I suppose, if we're blunt about it, we're in the process of some sort of weird blame game with Boris Johnson and key ministers saying that, you know, they'll only talk to Brussels, only negotiate if Brussels accepts that the withdrawal agreement and, of course, the backstop within it are completely dead. And they know that Brussels can never accept that. So essentially, they're just trying to pile the blame on Brussels for the complete failure of any negotiation.
Well, actually, the failure of the negotiation goes back a long way. It goes back to the way that Theresa May and her government approached this negotiation. I don't blame the EU, by the way. I'm one of those who always says, if I was them, I'd have behaved in almost pretty much the same way. They do a lot of trade deals. They know exactly how to operate in a trade deal. They treat you immediately as a third country. They did that, and they're always very aggressive. That's what they do. My problem was the British government seemed to think they were talking to friends. They're not friends, because we're leaving the European Union. So they were behaving in the way that they thought. But the British government spent its whole time trying to find ways in which they could satisfy the concerns of the European Union, which was manna from heaven for them. And the result is the deal that we've got here now, which is beneficial to the European Union dramatically, but not beneficial to the UK at all.
But why won't Boris Johnson be straight with the British people? Why does he still say, or at least he said a few weeks ago, that the chances of a no-deal exit are 1,000,000 to 1 against? I mean, that's patent nonsense.
Well, it depends what you mean by a deal and a no deal. This is where the phraseology is too simplistic. It doesn't sum up what the relationship will be regardless. So what we have is a withdrawal agreement, which is an all-encompassing process, which has within it payments that we are meant to make, 39 billion to them. But in it has an implementation period where we'd stay in for up to 2, maybe 3 years. We'd also accept the rule of the Court of Justice. The backstop would mean that the Northern Ireland would have to remain pretty much in the customs union and mostly in the single market. So that's the withdrawal agreement, which we are saying, no, that is dead. But in the meantime, they have prepared for not having the withdrawal agreement, and so are we. And what does that entail? That means there are already between 17 and 30, what they call mini deals. These are deals that are all about planes landing, aviation safety, transport. Well, they are, because they're all the elements about functionality, which are deals. So when Boris Johnson talked about 1,000,000 to 1, the answer is there are lots of deals that we've done. They're not the overarching deal, but they are elements of functionality. The idea that we're leaving with no functionality between the European Union and the UK is complete and utter nonsense, but
Well,
always comes out positive.
you can dress it up any way you like.
Yep.
You can call it no deal, you can call it hard Brexit, call it what you like. The fact is, your party, the Conservative Party, for generations has prided itself on being the party of business, of sound money, of fiscal responsibility. If there is a no-deal Brexit, which you appear now to accept is highly likely, that reputation is going to be shredded.
Well, let's place what comes in front of everything else, which is that we asked the British people and told them at the same time their decision is binding, whether or not they wanted to stay in or leave the European Union. And in my view, at the end of it all, is democracy trumps everything else. So we have to get on with it. Whether one likes it or not, the reality is they voted to leave. So we have to leave. The question really is... But you didn't,
with respect, you didn't tell them that that would involve abandoning notions like sound money, a strong pound, fiscal responsibility, being a party that actually listened to business. Yeah. All of that has been junked. You didn't actually tell them that.
No, because most of that is complete nonsense, with respect. The reality for us is that all of these things are transitory. So what's already happened since we left is the pound fell. Actually, in my view, it was overvalued anyway. That has meant actually that our exports have boosted, and that, funnily enough, what is really putting pressure on the European Union at the moment in a monetary sense is that their economy is now teetering on the edge of recession. Germany is in real trouble, down to 3-day working week in some of their manufacturing sectors. But what they have seen is a de facto 12% tariff on their goods because the pound fell by 12%. So that means if they have tariffs after that, they have tariffs on top of the fall. So already their competitiveness in the UK has fallen. So when we look at this carefully, what we're saying is these things move around. Floating currencies move, they adjust in accordance with each other. The key element that has to be decided, and I've talked to lots and lots of businesses, and most businesses, the vast majority that export, say they're not worried about this any longer. They've made the progress.
I don't know what businesses you talk to.
Banks, I talk to industry, I talk to farmers.
You've alighted on the currency issue, and we see a very weak pound, but it's not just about the weak currency, is it? I mean, to quote Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, I know you're not a great fan of his, but he is the governor of the Bank of England. In the event of no deal, he says, and a no transition Brexit, sterling is going to fall, but not only that, risk premiums on UK assets are going to rise, volatility is going to spike higher. If we're talking about honesty, why don't you come clean with the British public and just say, yes, all of that is true, and we are prepared to accept a very, very high price for this Brexit of ours?
I don't believe that the price is high. What I say to those who forecast the worst cases is that they may come about, but then again, they may not come about. Let's just take most of their previous forecasts. Almost every single forecast by the Bank of England has been wrong. You know, they forecast directly after we even voted for Brexit, we would have unemployment rise by 500,000, instead of which its employment has gone up by nearly 1.5 million. They said that we would have an immediate crash, the stock market. The stock market hasn't crashed. They've had all these various things were thrown at us. They've been thrown at us again and again and again. Many of their models are quite incorrect. So I don't doubt that there may be some adjustments that take place straight after if we leave without any particular withdrawal agreement with the EU, but I believe very, very quickly indeed that will all rectify and stabilise itself.
You frankly question the competence, it seems, of the Governor of the Bank of England, but I can't imagine you question the competence of your own government and its officials. You do?
I do. I question...
So when officials who've been working on no Brexit,
I question the Treasury,
on no deal Brexit...
Well, let me just finish this. Almost all the main forecasters have been fundamentally wrong throughout this process. By the way, these are all the same bodies that failed to spot the crash in 2008. Every one of them. The Treasury, the Bank of England, the IMF, all of them didn't get it. They've all forecast exactly the same, with or without margins, about terrible problems after the vote. They got it wrong.
The £2
so I
billion
have a very, very simple view about this, which is they don't know the future any more than you do or I do.
And so the £2 billion that is currently being spent on no-deal preparation is being handled by officials who you have no faith in, I guess. Because those very officials have talked about, for example, the real dangers within the education department. We've seen the leaked emails. Warehousing and stockpiling capacity, they say, is going to be very limited. This department has limited levers to address the risks. We're heavily dependent on the actions of major suppliers and other government departments to ensure continued provision of food for schools. This is the kind of planning that's now happening. Yeah. Are you saying these officials are fear-mongering and incompetent?
No. What I'm saying simply is be very careful that when you plan for these things, you understand what is almost certainly going to happen, not what you think will absolutely happen in the worst case. And I'll give you a good example of this. The other day I went to a presentation by the contingency executive, all right? And they were to tell us all these things about where they had set their requirements and what they thought was going to go wrong. They told us that they planned for enormous hold-ups at Calais, which would backlog traffic in Dover all the way up. So all of these great plans for stackbacks would happen because this would slow down fresh food and everything coming across, cause major problems. So I asked them a very simple question. I said, in all of your contingency planning, did you bother to talk to the Calais Port Authority? Did you talk to the president of the Pas du Nord? Because they had come out before that and said, number one, there will be no delays at Calais. Why? Because they will let literally everything through that went through before. If they have to stop anything, it goes back 40 kilometres to an inspection point, which they are now completing. That inspection point is based on what happens at Rotterdam on a daily basis. And so the time limits and delays at Calais are now absolutely being refuted by the French authorities themselves. And if they aren't being delayed...
With respect, it's not just about what happens at Calais, it's about what happens at Dover as well.
The Dover Authority has also said...
I just wonder...
Can I just finish this? The Dover Authority has also said, which they took no account of, that they will not stop anything coming into the UK that would have passed through previously, and any inspections will be done well away from the port, and they will prioritise things like fresh food. So with all of that going on, you have got to ask yourself a question about government. Are we in the business, or have we been in the business of frightening people, or have we been in the business of actually trying to get this right?
So many different officials and experts predicting a much, much more painful no-deal Brexit than you appear ready to countenance. But let's park that for a moment and let's talk about the looming constitutional crisis that the United Kingdom faces. There are many senior figures inside your party, including very recent former ministers, including Philip Hammond, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, David Gauke, who was Justice Secretary, and a former Prime Minister, John Major, who was sitting in that chair just a short time ago, all adamant that they can and they will block a no-deal Brexit. How are you going to make sure they're wrong?
Well, it's up to them what they want to do. I don't see what the mechanisms are, but, you know, Parliament is Parliament. They'll have to make their decisions of what they have to do. Right now, the default position is that it is law that we leave on the 31st of October, whatever. And by the way, that's under European law. So unless we ask for an extension, we have to leave under European law, which we are governed by the way, until the 11 o'clock on the 31st of October. So Parliament can do what it likes, but the key issue is, even if Parliament was to try and change the date, European law, unless we ask for an extension and are granted one, we leave at the end of the Article 50 process.
Assuming, so as you seem to know, that Boris Johnson will be the Prime Minister throughout that period, it is, of course, possible the Prime Minister will be replaced. There may well be a vote of confidence in him in early September. He may well lose it.
Well, he may lose it. He may lose it, in which case then, under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, as Lord Sumption said the other day, quite rightly, by the way, under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, you then have 14 days in which somebody else, a party, has to command a majority in the House. Otherwise, it is accepted under that Act that the existing government continues until another government is formed.
Boris Johnson would have to... Hang on, let's just go this piece by piece.
I was going to walk you through what the Act says.
Well, yeah, but there's a phase you've missed out, if I may. That is, would Boris Johnson resign if he lost a vote of confidence?
No, Lord Sumption was quite clear about this. There is no requirement for the government to resign, because that's what you'd be having if the Prime Minister resigned.
But there is precedent.
No. We've never had this before under the Fixed Term Parliament Act.
Well, OK, under the Fixed Term Parliament Act. Listen to these words. It seems to me the Tory party is in danger of ripping itself apart over these constitutional issues. Here are the words of another esteemed former colleague of yours, Sir Malcolm Rifkind. If the Prime Minister refused to respect the normal consequence of losing a confidence vote, if he sought to prevent both Parliament and the electorate having a final say on no deal, he would create the gravest constitutional crisis since the actions of Charles I led to the Civil War.
A lot of nonsense. What dear old Malcolm is busy doing is talking about what used to happen in the old days. Before the Fixed Term Parliament Act, you had a vote of confidence. If you lost the vote of confidence, you had to resign and there was a general election. That was the precedent. What has happened since the formulation of this Fixed-Term Parliament Act is that it is very clear. It is a very different process. What it is meant to do is allow for a process for another government to be formed. So if you have a vote of confidence and lose the vote of confidence, the government stays until another government can be formed. If that another government cannot be formed, then 14 days later, the Prime Minister has to call an election within reasonable time. So that is the process. It is not as it was. Malcolm Rifkind, I'm afraid, is guilty of looking at what used to happen, not what happens now. That is the constitutional position. Lord Sumption, I have to tell you, no small beer on the idea of the Constitution, said categorically the other day, I think 2-3 days ago, he said that this is the process. This is what will happen. The government does not have to resign until either the election or that other government is formed.
Coming back to this notion of the Conservative Party tearing itself apart, whatever happens over the next few days and weeks, it seems to me like the party cannot continue to include people such as yourself on one side and those like Dominic Grieve, Ken Clarke, Philip Hammond on the other, who feel that no-deal Brexit would be a complete betrayal of the interests of the British people. What is going to happen to your party?
Well, what's going to happen to all parties? The Labour Party is quite divided over this issue.
Let's focus on your party.
I'm simply making a point. You always focus on the Conservative Party. The reality is politics and the public are divided on this issue. We just have to recognise that. But what we have to do is recognise the overarching priority is to deliver on the democratic vote of the British people. 17.4 million people, the largest number ever to vote in a British election, voted to leave the European Union. So that is our number one priority.
Let me stop you there. Interesting. Number one priority. Isn't that another way of saying we are no longer a Conservative Party, we are the Brexit Party?
No, we have always been the Conservative Party, but we also are the party that gave the British people...
Party, and part of your strategy, and Dominic Cummings, who of course is the most important advisor to Boris Johnson, his strategy is to ensure that by becoming the Brexit Party, you neutralise the threat of Nigel Farage and his Brexit Party. Well, that's what this is about.
No, we're the Conservative Party, but we happen to believe in delivering on what we promised the British people, which is their decision was binding on a British government. The problem we've got at the moment is the British public voted as a majority, but the majority in Parliament is in fact mostly for Remain. So this is where the Parliament now is creating a constitutional crisis at being completely at odds with the British public on a major constitutional issue. So the answer to that is, well, we draw our authority not from Parliament, we draw it from the British people who loan it to Parliament for a period of that governance. Then we hand it back for an election and ask them again for that authority. We gave them the authority when we gave them the referendum. Parliament now must act on that. So in theory, Parliament should be the Brexit Parliament. It shouldn't be just the Conservative Party arguing for this, because there are many Labour MPs who now recognise, well, if we don't deliver
as
on
you are
Brexit,
well aware, we live in a representative
in
democracy, not a direct democracy.
No, we do.
Well, that's the truth.
But Stephen, it's very important. When Parliament votes overwhelmingly to hand the decision to the British people, it votes again to endorse it overwhelmingly. It votes overwhelmingly to trigger Article 50, which is explicit that within 2 years you must leave the European Union.
And you know what?
Then we must deliver on that. That's constitutionally the case.
You're reminding me with your passion that we had a former Tory Prime Minister, John Major, in that chair just the other day, banging on the table, making points entirely and absolutely contradictory to the ones you are
But he doesn't believe in referenda, so he doesn't think himself bound by this referendum.
Let me, in that spirit of wondering what on earth is happening inside your party, and indeed what is going to happen to the divisions in the country, let us consider together what happens on November 1st. What happens to Britain the day after Brexit? I think we have to assume for the time being it's going to be a no-deal Brexit. The problem is that on November 1st, the UK still will be in a protracted Brexit crisis because it will need to go back to the EU, argue for a comprehensive trade deal, trade agreement, and it won't get it unless it makes the concessions the EU demands, which will include some form of backstop in Ireland and which will include the payment of the £39 billion divorce bill.
In this case, we won't do a free trade deal with them, and guess who's damaged by that? The EU is disproportionately. Yes, but the EU is disproportionately damaged. You know, I know a lot of politicians in different countries, and I know very well. There was a very interesting man the other day here, Otto Henkel, who's just retired as an MEP. He's a German MEP, and he made a really interesting speech in the European Parliament. And he said to them, you know, the UK leaving the European Union is not just some small country, he said. For us, it's the equivalent of 19 or 20 of the smallest countries in Europe. There's only 27, remember, left after us. 19 or 20 of those, 2/3, leaving the European Union at once. He said the damage to the European Union, economically, unless we resolve this now, will be dramatic, and also psychologically. He said the blame lies with the Commission for failing to recognise that they need to do this. My point here is, if we were to leave without an arrangement, because the European Union decided they did not want to make an arrangement on any terms other than those that they've got at the moment, then they also must take the consequences of what happens next. What happens next is the loss of their markets unless they do something.
You need to face the consequences
my argument, there is another way of doing this.
Well, hang on, I want to just fix on the consequences for you, your Conservative Party, and for Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He's already made a whole host of promises about how much money he's going to spend post-Brexit on tax cuts, mainly for the wealthy, but also he wants new police, 20,000 of them. He wants new infrastructure, new railways. He is splashing the cash in his head. But the truth is, as the former Chancellor Philip Hammond has pointed out, and the Office for Budget Responsibility, there will be no cash to spend in the context of a no-deal Brexit. So you're tying the hands with this no-deal Brexit of your own Conservative government.
No, I don't believe that to be the case, for two reasons. First of all, I think it's wholly in the interest of the European Union after we leave, immediately after we leave, which is to immediately strike a basic trade deal with us.
My goodness, you are a man of faith, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I've been to see Mr. Barnier, and I've negotiated with them twice, separate to the government. I think I have some idea of where they are. And the truth is, right now, they won't move. If they do move, it would astonish me before we leave. But what will happen directly afterwards is they have to make some kind of arrangement with the United Kingdom, because all the other countries whose jobs are at risk and everything else will be demanding that they reach some kind of trade arrangement with us. And they do it rather quickly. So the GATT and WTO all allow for this in the arrangements post a breakup between two big parties like this. They allow for a period of stasis while you sort your arrangements out.
You have remarkable confidence about the post-Brexit British economy. What about the post-Brexit State of the Union? Your own Conservative Party leader in Scotland, Ruth Davidson, says a no-deal exit would be a disaster. The latest opinion polls since Boris Johnson came to power show the majority of Scots now want independence. You, the Conservative and Unionist Party, are about to destroy the Union.
No, I think the thing that's been destroying the Union, or getting it very close to, has been our membership of the European Union. As you've seen time after time after time, smaller nations in unions like this have used the European Union as a way of separating from their union. In our case, Scotland has been attracted by the idea of the European Union, meaning
do you care, in parentheses, do you care if Scotland ultimately votes for independence? Do you care if the Union is dismantled?
Of course I care, but you're not going to stop that process of them wanting to say that, because the nationalists exist for only one thing. They certainly don't run Scotland well, but they exist for only one thing, which is to separate from the United Kingdom. But the United Kingdom is their major marketplace, and there are more Scots now living in the diaspora around London than there are in Scotland. So we are bound together of 300 years. Of course I care about that, but I also don't believe that you resolve a problem like that by running scared from the very people who wish to break up the Union.
We're almost out of time. A final thought. You have exhibited a remarkable degree of confidence about Britain and your party's futures throughout this interview.
About the UK.
Do you ever, maybe late at night, think to yourself, my God, what if I'm wrong? What if Brexit is actually a hugely damaging event for the United Kingdom?
Well, I wouldn't be sitting here and saying what I said if I doubted for one moment that the UK is capable not only of leaving the European Union well, but at the end of the day, I believe the UK is arguably the most flexible, remarkable economy on the planet. All the various economies have all made that very clear. They come top of the league. I mean, you have to look at our universities, 4 of the top universities out of the top 10. No other European university gets into the top 10. We are ready. What we've got to make sure is the interim period directly after is managed, but I have no doubt the United Kingdom is a remarkable place that will bounce straight back pretty quickly.
Iain Duncan Smith, we have to end there. Thanks for being on Hard Talk. Thank you.